go and record.
On in.
So, hello. Good to see
Hello.
you. I don't think we have to introduce our names anymore. We're in like episode 40, and if you guys don't
You
know what
know
our
us.
names are, we're going to withhold them this session, this podcast. Just go look it up. So,
In a live
I'm
episode.
excited. I'm very excited about today. And I know I'm supposed to teach in about an hour. We're talking about maybe doing it tomorrow. I was like, no, I really want to talk about today.
I'm excited. I think this is a great topic that
Yeah,
came up
and
with. I'm so excited.
we are talking today about when a partner refuses sex.
Yeah.
So, whew, all right.
Big
Now,
one.
I was thinking about the way we could do this is
Yeah.
um, we could talk about what we generally see. Again, we try to be as careful as we can, not oversharing, not undersharing, just so that all of you listeners kind of, if you are listening to this, maybe you can relate a whole lot. But I'll let's just kind of interview one another. I'll interview. I ask you for yeah. So
Well,
a few questions, and then I was just curious, what are the type of clients or type of couples are that you see that do this, or what are the characteristics that you often notice with couples that ref- where one partner is refusing sex? Now, I'm very careful in that verb. I'm not saying can't have sex. Like there are people I know
mhm.
they
Right.
can't, mainly because of health issues. We're not talking about that. We're talking about when the marriage has gotten to the point where, and it's what I'm seeing. It's primarily women, not the men. Although there are circumstances I've seen men as well. So I'm going to be very careful. I'm not going to say this is a woman. You get what I'm saying, but I would say the majority of it, the vast majority in my own experience and what I've read, seems to be when she gets to the point where I'm like, I don't want intimacy. Um, what are there characteristics or things that you see in these couples that seem to be repeated
Hmm.
over, you know, longitudinal time? It's like that's my first. What are some things that I just want to describe the type of couple that we're often talking about.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I'm looking all kinds of ways because that's when I go into my deep thoughts.
Mm,
No, I'm replaying just experiences and conversations and things like that. So I guess where I would go with this is a few things. One, I agree. I think I see it. I hear complaints more for males. With that being said, I wouldn't go so far, like you said, to say that's universal. I have also heard complaints from females in
yeah.
that way. And
Hmm.
I think one of the trends, I'm trying to look at, I guess, where things interlap. I think sometimes one partner might feel like physical intimacy has, and by that, so sex, right? It, there's gone a long period of time where they have not had sex, and they're like, okay,
Mm,
like we need to do this. And then the
yeah.
other partner on their side of it, again,
Mm,
medical things aside, because that's a really important thing that I encourage couples to look at whenever physical intimacy or things of that nature are on the table. We want to look for those. But um, the other partner is usually at a point, I can't for whatever reason because of this, and this. So one of it, if I can make a analogy here, one person is thinking of it almost like a switch and how it's coming up in the conversation. The other person is looking at it at like a dial. Like there are things that have happened over time where if these things were in place, then I could get there with you. And then it becomes the urgency to connect in this way and the call for, oftentimes what I see is a breakdown of emotional connection, emotional intimacy, whether that be in the friendship, whether that be in having fun and spending time, whether that be the impact of stressors or escalated conflict, where one person is saying that these things have gone on so far, it's really kind of just created an automatic off switch where I'm not even thinking maybe about sex in that way, and I'm not going to go there until these. And when we say refuse, it almost feels like for the other receiving partner, I can see that like a weapon, like you're kind of holding not maybe as a weapon. I know you said refusing is different at the beginning, so I'm going totally against what this podcast was. But I would say where one person is receiving that as, well, you're saying so all these things first and then we can go there. And I think for the person saying, I can't go there, it's really about, I need, if I reframe that, is I need a level of comfort and security and connection to you that I feel like we haven't addressed in a way where it's translating into having a positive impact. So whatever it is we've tried, we're on such different wavelengths as to what those needs are or how those efforts are being received by the other partner.
Mm.
So hopefully somewhere in my ramblings, um,
No, you're not rambling at all.
there's some
No.
distinct thoughts in there. Just for all the listeners, I'm getting over. We've had a realm of sicknesses, so sometimes my thoughts are not as concise as I
Mm.
hope lately. Um, but what are your thoughts on any of what you said, Peter? Do
No,
you
I
have
think
any thought
what you said
or?
was really good. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so there's like, yeah, it's such a huge topic. So it's like I'm wondering if we should just kind of like spend some time unpacking it because there's so many variables, right?
They really are.
Um, I will say this, like on the surface, whenever I hear a couple and their, yeah, the original, I guess, characteristics that I'm often seeing is it's kind of similar to you. It's like there seems to be um, kind of a rule book, I guess,
Hmm.
that I
Yeah.
haven't seen yet, and I need to see this from you in order for me to open my body to you, which actually makes a lot of sense, on the
Yes.
surface. So I lost trust. I You broke my
Yeah.
trust, and you went behind my back, or maybe there was something even more serious, and I need to make amends of that before we just get in the bed and just have missionary style, okay? Or I need to really recover from this. And from a guy's perspective, I actually understand. Like, so I don't. Let's talk dirty this session, okay? I just want to because it's
Go
like
for it.
for me to get hard as a man, and if I
Mhm.
don't feel connected with my wife, um, I'm not. I can't get hard. Like I just
Mhm.
can't. Like I need to feel wooed. I need to feel cared for. So I actually understand that part from a male perspective. Like
Mhm.
it's actually harder sometimes, to think like I can't have sex unless I'm aroused.
Right.
Um, I can't just, whereas women's a little different. Women can actually have sex even though they're totally not unaroused. Use some KY jelly, whatnot. You could still physically have sex. It's impossible for a man to have sex unless he's around. He's aroused, which is really interesting when you think about it from that perspective, because
That
it's
is
kind of
right.
presumptuous for me as a man to, you know, get to the point where I literally physically am not aroused at all toward my wife, just giving that scenario, and then act surprise if my wife then says, or my girlfriend, whatever, says, "Hey, I can't have sex because you're not doing this." So,
I really
it's
appreciate
kind
that.
of nice to say that out loud a little bit because it's like it is easy to be so centered on yourself a little, and whenever I'm like, okay, that does make sense to me, and I get that. And now, I suppose the other thing that I often see with these couples, it's they're often very busy. They often have kids. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
it's I've never heard it with just like a maybe once. Yeah, I don't think I ever have with a couple, maybe a couple where there were just the two of them living together where they just weren't having sex for years. I've yet maybe you have. So it's usually with children, um, and she or he they're just done. They've done the bids for connection over and over and over again. At least they felt that way,
Yeah.
and now they're at the point where they're like, okay, unless things radically change, I can't I can't open up to you. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more to that. I mean,
Well, one, I love what you were saying earlier too about arousal. I think that's really an important point, and I appreciate that point because I think it's too how we're defining sex, how we're defining desire, how we're defining these things
yeah,
is really important. And I encourage that too in my couples. And the other part is emotional connection. Thank you so much for helping me with my words. But when you said trust, that also sparked something in me because I did, so I shouldn't say I. you know, Gottman in some of his works talks about trust in some different ways, but some of the ideas in how we create a metric for that can be, are you, not just because maybe there was a betrayal of some kind, but trust can also be about, are you doing the things you say you're going to do? Are you there for me? Do you have my back? Trustworthiness, which I think actually is a big um um is pivotal for women when it comes to attraction. I think that was one of the qualities they ranked the highest, was trustworthiness. But then the other part of that is, when a negative event or situation comes up, do I believe we can handle that respectfully? So when we break that down,
Hmm.
that goes a lot into day-to-day life, like when you were talking about bids. And I see that too, where over time it's like they've become so siloed in some ways, and that's where I think the friendship is suffering. They're, whether it be stress, whether it be life transitions, whether it be kids, or
Hmm.
navigating other life stressors or transitions. I mean, they can be so vast. There's
Yeah.
just this complete breakdown where I feel like on some level they both feel so unseen. They've
Yeah.
stopped maybe having fun with
Right.
each other, and I think when it comes to sex, I think that's also a big part of it, is, there the trust, emotional closeness, like the building blocks, right? That there's a level of connection there. Not I, based on, this is from a more couple standpoint and what I'm seeing in maybe some of my work, but where also, so emotional connection, some of the common themes, and then also um wanting it to be something where if we're not connecting in just day-to-day lives, showing interest in what's going on in our worlds, um, you know, really just showing care and regard for each
Mm.
other, there's almost like a numbness, a coldness that kind of sets into that dynamic. And I think that's when, if we're not prioritizing these other important facets of our relationship, then it's easier to kind of put sex over here, I think. I shouldn't say easier.
Yeah. Sure.
Where I think it's more easily goes into that category of, um, this is something that we're not going to even indulge in.
Yeah. Well, and also the longer they wait, the harder
Right.
it's going to be. I mean, that's another thing too.
Mhm.
It some of the worst case scenarios is have been years and years, even decade, and even more in the making. And there is something
Yeah.
that becomes so. Um, I think that's where I kind of want to tap into, because
Yeah.
my struggle as a therapist is that I know all that, acknowledge all that. At the same time, I wonder that, I'm starting to see just the seriousness and the crisis, if that is actually happening. Like,
Mhm.
I am now starting to take the belief that whenever I hear that, I put it in the same category, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead, as
No.
they just confessed to me having an affair. That's the I put it pretty high up now. I used to kind of say, well, we'll get there, but where I'm at, and I'm not saying that she's having or they're having, but
Okay.
although we can kind of debate that later with certain type, like personality groups and whatnot, especially the ones that are using sex as a weapon, which I think I would like to eventually get at, because
Yeah.
that does happen, and that's really, really concerning. But anyway, I'm gonna bypass that. But whenever a couple says, okay, it's been 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, and there still seems to be, well, one more thing, and then one more thing, and then one more thing. That's where I'm like, okay, we're in crisis mode right now. And why is it a crisis? When I should, just to jump right in, why I do believe this is a crisis, why I wanted to talk to you this about this, is because I don't think people realize the seriousness of it. Like, if I refuse making love at all to my partner, that makes her so much more vulnerable toward other people. It leaves her closed toward me intimately, from an intimate perspective. I have shut the door, which has left her or him in that position where they have really no option to release through orgasm, through connection, other than either masturbation
True.
or outside connection. I don't want them to do outside connection. Masturbation, I'm like, okay, I'm pretty ambiguous about that. I don't know where your stance is
Or
like,
porn.
sure, right. So that's where I'm like the direness of it, I think is pretty significant. And I don't see a lot of, I mean, I don't see a lot of, maybe I'm missing it, but like a lot of teachings on how serious it is. I almost kind of hear it like as as if it's like a symptom, or maybe one of the problems with a bad marriage. And I'm wondering, maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Maybe it actually is just throwing that out there. I mean, yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, I value that though, because I think the distinction being, because even how I'm probably talking about it in the podcast today is more of as a symptom. And I think you're introducing a really important vantage point, which is that that is the problem. That is the discussion. Yes, those other things are important, but there should also be I shouldn't say should. There, not through this lens, there can be a level of urgency that this is something also that needs attention, and it's not just working through those other things and then indirectly this is something that opens up again in the relationship, that this is also a discussion in some cases where we need to just define that as a marker. Am I hearing that right or understanding your position accurately?
I I think that's where, yeah, and that's kind of my, a little bit. I mean, I want to. It's like, yeah, it's. I mean, it's wanting to try to find, whether it's a root or also, not just a root, but also things that my couples can do immediately to try to alleviate the situation. But
Yeah.
I am seeing it like quite a serious thing. It's a pretty serious thing. Um, so the characteristics. Let me back up a little bit because so are going to be children usually, been married for, I'm going to say more than 7 or 8 years. That's generally what I'm seeing. It gets to the point. It's gotten to the point where there's been a lot of hurt, a lot of bitterness that's corroded the marriage for a very long time. Maybe they feel trapped. They don't necessarily feel like they can necessarily get out. This is maybe their one thing that they may be able to control. I often see. It often really upsets the other partner, really angers them. Then that creates a cycle where that person then is less attracted because of the defensiveness. But
Right.
they become very rigid in those roles, almost like that person then continues to refuse sex. That person continues to get very angry at the partner.
Mhm.
Um, where do we go? Like, and so I get, leading. I want to go into like the next segment, but what are some coping skills? What are some things that you've found to be really helpful? And have you seen success on this? And I'd love to talk to you
Yeah.
about some things that I've seen work and not work. But what are some things that you would say to a couple that's there?
Well, so I think one is what you said just a moment ago, which is identifying that this is an issue, getting to a point where we're saying, okay, whoa, this is actually an issue that we need to open up some discussion around, whether it be how we're defining desire, what we're comfortable or uncomfortable with. Because I think what's also really important is in having some of those other factors that you were just talking about, we also aren't the same person that we were, or for me as a female having had a child, maybe the things that turn me on early on or now with where my body's at now after having given birth, I might not be turned on in the same way. you
Right.
know I might, I may need a little different things, or I might, you know different interests. And so we don't
Yeah.
exist in a vacuum. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing is there's not when everything becomes a little more tense and things there's a lot of negative anticipation. I think it's also harder to go into, hey, so what turns you on lately?
Yeah.
So you need to kind of break the ice and just say, okay, we're not having sex. And what's going
Mm,
on there? Like just kind of make
mm.
desensitizing it a little bit. Um,
Nice.
And
Yeah.
I think when you do that, it's also saying it's okay to talk about this. Like, it doesn't
Mm,
mean I expect you to go home and hop in bed tonight, and
mm,
get it on. But I do need you both to start thinking about whether it be individually and to get it to a point relationally where this is becoming part of your language and your dialogue.
yeah.
You have to know each other as sexual beings too. And you
I
have to
yeah, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
no, go for it. Go for it.
Well, I
Well,
love
just
what you said on that because it's almost like a lot of these same couples are so afraid to bring it up. You bring up
yeah,
such a great point. Such a good strategy. It's like, can we just talk about it? Okay, fine. We're not having sex.
let's talk about
I mean, you don't want to do it in this passive aggressive way, which can be done. It's like, oh, my wife doesn't give me any, like, which I've seen, and that's only going to hurt.
yeah.
But we're not making love. We're not constantly, we're like we used to. Uh,
Mhm.
I wonder why that is. And yeah, I think where I get kind of stuck is especially when I meet with a person and all they hear back is one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. And that's where I have seen it as a weapon before.
Yeah.
And that's really concerning because it's one thing to be like, all right, let's try to alleviate the need and then see if that actually turns you toward that person. And what I often go with that is the DBT Dear Man acronym, like
Oh,
describe
yeah.
what's going on, express your emotion, assert your need, and then reinforce. Stay mindful, appear confident, negotiate. But let's talk about the dear. The asserting your need part, if she's saying to him, hey, I need more emotional intimacy, he then gives her emotional intimacy, but there's still no sex, then we're confused. I'm confused and he's confused, legitimately so.
Mhm.
And that's where I think I want to keep pressing, 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 because maybe that's not necessarily the need. Because the point of Dear Man is you should see the reinforcement after the need has been met. So if we keep saying to our partners, hey, I need you to be more connected with me, I need you to pick up the kids more, that person does everything they possibly can, pick up the kids, there for their partner, no sex. What do? That's where I start to go in challenge mode. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, I'm stuck here. Is that really what you need? Or are you using this to kind of have control? Now, I understand the element of control in a marriage where you don't feel like you have a voice. Do we
Mhm.
need healing from that? Do we need to make atones for that? So maybe what we don't need is that type of maybe not picking up the kids. Is this what you need? I feel like I need to get control again. And often they're maybe a little hesitant to say, oh no, that's not what I need. Then I'm even more, so I will often I I stay to the point where I'm going to play ignorant as a therapist until they really tell me what that is rather than me guessing it. And that's on their job. And it should be something that's simple and clear because really when it comes down to it, I think with our bodies biologically, we need this. It's a human need.
Mhm.
They've done so many studies that it alleviates stress. It could actually increase your life
Mhm.
expectancy. I don't know about you, but orgasm's fantastic. I love it. It's great. I wish I could. It's like, I think we can need it. I think we all need it. It's like I see these stressful couples. They're doing everything. It's like you would benefit each other, right? If you guys both got on. Okay, fine. You're mad at him. Use his body. So I'm kidding. Give him a pill. So, I mean, okay. So I guess that's when do you start to kind of do the challenge part? Because I think the validation part's really, really important. This is
Yeah.
one of those areas that I think kind of needs both. It's,
Mhm.
because I could see a lot of couples getting frustrated with just the validation part. Because a lot of my couples will be like, yeah, I've been doing that for like 17 years or 8 years, or excuse me, or like 5 years, and it hasn't changed. Okay. Does that make sense? Like, where would you go with that? Or yeah,
It
is there a
does.
challenge
And
element? But please push back and yeah,
no,
challenge.
no, I see that. And I think it's tricky. And I think it depends, honestly, couple to couple. But I think one of the challenges that comes with that is you have to know, kind of going back to the arousal and going back to the turn ons and turn offs, like you have to know yourself to that extent too. And I think when sex is not part of the discussion for so long, I think also maybe it's about you rediscovering that for yourself on some level. I'm not saying going out doing something with someone else, but just meaning getting to know your body and paying attention to that. Because how can I tell my partner a need if I don't know what my need is? And I think there is some self-work there. The other thing, I love what you said about we have to be clear.
Yeah.
And for those couples that aren't seeing a change, I get for the other person why that can be really defeating and rejecting because it just seems like no matter what I do, it's not good enough. And also, how does that affect um, intimacy, closeness, confidence? I mean, feeling good about yourself to be intimate, right? If I just feel like nothing I'm doing is, I see also stories where that goes into questioning yourself, questioning your worth, questioning, does my partner see me as an attractive um person? Um and it's just really toxic, right? And so I think when you're in that loop, it's important to say, okay, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're maybe trying to solve something on a surface level. What do we have desire for? So sometimes too, what I'll notice in again, not all, but there's actually also a discrepancy in desire. Not, again, medical things aside, that this could also just be an inherent difference within the couple, potentially. And then it's compounded by all those other characteristics. And so sometimes what I say to people is okay, when we talk about this, how are you even both defining that?
Hmm.
What do you actually, let's assume, put these things over here. We know we're going to get to them. We know these things are important. We know we need to work on them. But if we're just talking about desire, and this is from one of the trainings I took a little while ago now. I think it was, I forget, I think she was a sex therapist. I wish I could recall her name. I'm sorry if you're listening. Um, but
So mad. She's probably listening, and she's so
like,
pissed.
word, Jessica, set your sources. But that was one of the questions in her training is desire for what? And I kind of stepped back and I was like, it's such a simple question, but when I've asked it in sessions, it kind of takes couples back. I noticed, and they're like, yeah, what do I want? Like, what am I desiring? And it kind of taps into those other questions regarding, what turns me on, what turns me off, what is it that I find, how do I define intimacy in that way? And I think that sometimes can be a good icebreaker is you have to have a shared goal, especially if we're both going to be participating in it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also if you don't have a shared goal, like what are we really doing here and how are we even coming together and stuff like that? Absolutely. Yeah. How do
so
you find that? How do you find that shared goal, would you say, when it comes to this? In this, do you sense that they're wanting intimacy or are they wanting something else? Are they both wanting the same thing? Or are they wanting yeah.
I think sometimes, I think more often than not, the when that question gets asked, ultimately, yes, there is a shared goal for connection. That is something that they both recognize. Yeah, we do want this. It might take a few conversations, but ultimately that's where we land. um, and then I think it's okay, well, let's break this down into tangible ways. And when we break it down, it's really your point about commitment. When we talk, I don't want anyone to be in distress. We don't want to associate physical intimacy with something uncomfortable or um
Mm.
anxiety. Like there might be some level of anxiety, especially if it's been so long
Yeah.
since we've been with each other in that way. But I think it's also something where I never want intimacy to be associated with something negative.
Mm. Hmm.
So for me, it's like it's okay to stretch, but I never want you to be in your distress zone, your danger zone. So what's a stretch you can commit to? And that's the one behavior I want them to do and commit to and follow through on. And so
All right,
that's
man.
what we start to do. So it's not, so instead of going through like, because I see that loop a lot and I get stuck in that loop too, just sometimes in those conversations. But then it's like, okay, let's break it down. If we're just talking about desire, if we're just talking about what physical connection looks like to you both in a way that doesn't go to a danger zone, This is one thing we can commit to. And then just to get curious about what's the outcome of that? What did I like? What didn't I like? And then that becomes a topic of conversation. Then we just kind of build on that. And with the goal of each one of them feeling a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more,
Hmm.
it's not maybe initially sex, but what it is physical connection.
Like,
When in a realm of years, where I agree with you, it's for some people it has been um a long period of time where they haven't connected sexually. And so I view any movement in that area as a sign
mhm.
of kind of progress with the goal
1,000%.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
getting there reasonably. But I think that, to your point about control, it gives them each a sense of control,
Yeah.
while also not letting the other person who might be really longing for it to feel
Yeah.
like you're going through the same loop, that there's a
Sure.
tangible action that they can count on.
Well, I like what you're saying there too. I mean, yeah. Um, I was laughing at something you said because you said, "How far do you want to stretch on this thing?" So I was like, "I'm sorry, we're talking about."
Hey, we're talking about sex.
Dang it! It's one of those topics I can feel like a 14-year-old boy talking about. No, to get all serious though, go back to this though.
Oh, and
I mean,
remind me to come back to something
I,
too.
I, yeah. I guess I wanted to flesh out because I almost feel like there's an element. Not that you're saying anything that's missing. It's just going back on the seriousness of it. I think where my approach is for a lot of my couples is okay. We're in crisis zone, and we're gonna stop with the if this if then. We're not gonna have that anymore. So we're gonna take that and we're gonna throw it away because that's
Mhm.
not working. Plus, that's not even how you're desired. I mean, think about the first boy you kissed. Did you really follow an if then kind of relationship in Jessica's mind? No, he just came up to you and kissed you. There was a sense of like romance there.
Yes.
I don't know your first kiss. I don't know, but I know my first kiss. My first kiss was in Little Mermaid, and it was during the freaking that little scene. And I was waiting for it because the other girl broke up with me. Her name was Rhea Yak. If you're still listening, if you're still alive, she broke up with me during Batman because 1989, I was 13. I loved Batman, so I didn't kiss her. So the next day, she broke up with me because I didn't kiss her. So I wanted to make up for it. Little Mermaid came out, and I was waiting for the kissing scene, and I just came in and kissed her. So was there an if-then relationship? Not necessarily, not in the way a lot of my couples do. There was this levity. There was this. I like what you're saying about humor and everything else. And I just like whenever a couple's there, I'm like, okay, we're going to throw away all this overly serious rules, okay, because that's bull poop to say that if he does this, or she does this, and this. Because I found out that that's garbage. That's just most of it's garbage. Some of it's kind of true, but it's just not. It's more of a defense mechanism. And what we want to bring in is real, transparent honesty. There is something that's in the human brain that both partners actually will get turned on when it's a good conflict and there's resolution and repair.
True.
So enough with the avoidance, enough with the gaslighting, enough with like all of these little rules. I want you guys to just swallow your pride, swallow your anxiety, lay naked in bed for 15 minutes every single week and just hold hands. And that's it. And that's it. Like that
Naked
is literally it. And like and it does take an element of practice here because I love what you said there. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have it's like I have a book called Therapies That Work, Treatments That Work,
Oh, I like that.
and I read the section on OCD, and it said like the bibliography in that book is like 400 pages long. So it's at the end of the day, they said the only treatment that works is not medicine, it's not psychotherapy, it's exposure therapy,
I
and
was
that's
gonna
it.
say it sounds like exposure to me, Peter.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. And
Literal.
so I think there is an element of this that is kind of like needs to, and I'm getting the sense like you're kind of doing that too. It's kind of like, all right,
Mhm.
let's just hold hands. Let's go on the walk. Let's just do that. And so usually with my couples, I just get rid of all the barriers. We're going to immediately try to introduce levity, unpredictability, healthy conflict, because that is what actually turns you on.
Yeah.
And then because that's spontaneity, that's curiosity. Curiosity turns you on for both partners. There is an element of male attraction, female attraction that's 100% real. I think when it comes to this, I want to look at the shared experience and tap in for both of you guys to do that. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have to roll. And what I mean by that, you're just, that's my innuendo.
Literally.
You're going to have to just do it. And doing it, it doesn't mean like missionary style no, no. What I often tell couples is like, I just want you to hold her hand for 10 minutes on the couch. And the next week, I just want you to grab her leg or grab his leg, okay, and just give him a hug. Put your head on his shoulder, just do like this. Just kind of pet his chest, kiss him on the chest. That's it. That's all I want you to do. And then like, give him a kiss for more than five, like Gottman says, more than 6 seconds. Actually, it's
Second kiss.
it's kind of
Yeah.
sexy. Actually, yeah,
It
it's like, what?
is.
Come on. So yeah, there's an element of that where it's like, so I think sometimes with therapists, not that you're doing like, but like it's that we can go so far and like, let's figure out every tiny weensy map meaning. And that actually kind of, I'm realizing that just doesn't work by itself. If it works a little bit, but
Mhm.
it's the spontaneity, the now, the presence, what DBT talks about, like the mindfulness, the emotional regulation. What can we do right here? I love your question. What turns me on? Because that is a hard question. And you're right. Like somebody in their 40s, radically different than seeing a person at the party, and yeah. And I think that's where fantasy comes in, all these other things. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also and I can't speak for all women, by no means do I wanna be in that role.
Right. Yeah. Please share.
But I think a common thing, especially too after, childbirth is oftentimes I think a big thing that comes up in a relationship is when people feel touched out. That can
Wow.
be a real big thing, and I know that's kinda unique to that
Oh,
transition
yeah.
at times.
Yeah.
But so there's such a need to, I think, have that conversation, and it's funny because to me, it's funny, um, where even sometimes, like, I try to think of kind of out there sometimes, out of the box, try to be out of the box as much as I can. Um, where if even in situations where that is a challenge, like to
Mm.
I love the naked cuddling. I'm an advocate of naked cuddling. I think it's a
Right.
great first step. And I know people have different stances with sensate focus where you're just exploring at first
Sure.
with just
Yeah.
touch and sensation. That's another one I
And
lean.
not to interrupt, my first like turn on as a child was guess what it was? Can you
What?
guess? Footsie.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Footsie. That's it. I remember 6th grade. Her name was Ashley. She was my girlfriend, and then she broke up with me when the Chicago Bears were playing for San Francisco 49ers in 1987. I remember that. I was on the phone. It was the worst day because the Bears lost, and she broke up with me. But we
Oh,
built a relationship on footsie. No, anyway, I just throw that out. Like, yeah, it could be that. It could be just
that's so
touching each other's
simple.
feet. Anyway, keep going. Yeah.
And so that's why, like, I say non-erotic zones, don't go after, like, those areas right now, but just get familiar with touch. That's one. And
Yes.
just
Yes.
get curious about what your partner feels like to you. And of course, listen if any spot is not comfortable, like, okay, stop, move on. But then the other part being for the receptor of touch, like, what do you notice? Like, what do you like? What don't you like so
Mm.
much? Like, it's just about getting curious about yourself, about the other person,
Mm.
and really kind of, I think too, so a few thoughts. I know I started in another thought and I'm just in one of those jumpy around moods, but
I bet our loyal audience all has a little bit of ADD. You should give
they're rolling with us.
a survey, and I guarantee all of our loyal listeners probably have undiagnosed or diagnosed ADD. But keep going. But we're on a train. That's what I love about it. Anyway.
Yeah, you're totally on a train.
We're totally on a train. Now keep
And
going.
and so I guess next stop on this train in my head is is, you know, when so sensate focus being one avenue and getting
Mm,
curious, and I think
yeah.
leading just getting curious again, and because I think where I was going with that is that oftentimes I think a deterrent to that are expectations. If I do this, then are they going to expect sex next? Like, are they going to just expect it's going to lead into that? I'm like, no, 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 no. It can just be that.
Yeah.
It's just that. That's all there is. Anything else, if you both want a little, explore a little more, then put words to it. Ask
Hmm.
for touch. But like, don't, but it's okay for it just to be that, right? That's where we're kind of restarting that
Love
narrative,
that.
kind of expose some of those expectations. And where the last train stop on my little ride in my head is that, you know, one of those out of the box kind of things that I think can be helpful. And this is just one of the shows I think I gravitated to. And I feel like this woman is my spirit animal. Like if I could be like her when I'm older. I don't know how old she is, but she's great. There's this show on Netflix. It's called How to Build a Sex Room. Have you ever seen it?
No.
It's oh
No.
my god, so much fun.
Huh.
So I forget how many seasons there are, but I promise
I'm
this
scared to
time.
put that in Google because I'm afraid I'm gonna like find stuff my wife's not gonna like. What were you on?
What were you doing? And
Like,
I remember I watched it. I was like,
yeah.
my husband's like, "What are you watching?" And I'm like, "I'm doing it for work." And he's like, "Can I watch?" I was like, "Yeah." And then we had some great
Oh,
conversations. But it
okay.
was like one of those things where, when I talked about desensitizing earlier, if we're uncomfortable just launching into like, okay, the naked cuddling or the touch or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
sometimes I say, okay, I want you to go home. I want you to watch this show, watch an episode with
Mm,
each other.
mhm.
And I want you at the end of that episode to talk about what you liked, something that made you feel uncomfortable, what was something that intrigued you,
Right.
any reaction, whatever it might be. I want you to talk about it because
Hmm.
I think it's also really normalizing to see other couples through the lens of a show or a movie or whatever. It can be a way to kind of see what another couple might do and kind of find words. Find, oh, I didn't know this thing existed, but yeah, now that I
Yeah.
see that, that is something I would be curious about, you know? And I think
Right.
it just, again, breaks the ice
Yeah.
and it can be a way that you both are in the moment with each other,
Mm.
learning about each other, taking some of the pressure off. Like you have to know what to say. No, we're just going to react to this together and see where it takes us. Um, and so that's, I think, sometimes a really um it's just a different way also to engage in this topic of we
Mm.
just gotta build a relationship to sex again. And that's individually, it's relationally, it's just understanding what it is for us and what we want out of it. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I guess it also brings in there's also a lot of elements. This is really I could unpack this because then I'm also often thinking of like the religious interpretations of our
Hmm.
bodies, and
Oh,
I
that's a
do have clients who are Christian, or yeah, who, and I went to seminary, and there is a wonderful verse that Paul says for my more religious clients who are like, your body is not your own, your body is your wife's, your body is not your own, your body is your husband's. And it's like, he's saying that Paul is in a time that's like a lot of persecution, and I like to think of sex, especially from a religious perspective, that it's rooted in the Garden of Eden. Because now I want to bring a little bit of like Gestalt,
yeah.
and it doesn't have to just be Christianity, Judaism, whatever. Like what it is like it tells us stories. I think that's one of the beautiful, like sex has been
Yeah.
around since our creation. Sex is, if you look at the story of the garden, it's the running away from not just God, but running away from each other, and you immediately start blaming. And it's like sex is also an example of the unity between me and my partner to be one, so that I'm fully intimate with that person, which is why affairs are so damaging.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're supposed to be one with me and you connected yourself with that person. And that's where the trauma comes in, the
Yeah.
attachment theory. That's where, the attachment bond of Sue Johnson comes in.
Yeah.
Why it's trauma when somebody has an affair. And so it's where I always also kind of go back to, it's like, what are we refusing, and how can we be back together as one and connected on a deeper level? I also wonder if maybe the part of their brain that's being activated is their Ian McGilchrist in his book, um, what is it? A Master and the Emissary talks about how the right brain focuses on the higher meaning and the gestalt, and the left brain on the
Mhm.
teeny weeny minutia, and it goes from right to left, back to right. And usually the left doesn't do a very good job because it's a poor emissary. It's the whole point of the book, and saying, well, this teeny weeny thing is super important, and the right brain is not buying it, or at least it's not connecting. And the emissary is supposed to do the hard detail works, but the right brain is supposed to put it all together and say, okay, how? How does this make sense? And I wonder if my older clients that are refusing to be one are like, there's no, yes, I got the kids, I got all this, I got all the check marks, but this doesn't make sense on how we're how we're building a sense of unity and like purpose. And I think that's great where I started with that whole verse. It's like that makes sense in that context because even if you're not a religious person, what Paul is saying is like these are people that were like being persecuted and dying as in in Corinth, or they're being persecuted their faith, or maybe not even persecuted, they were being very drawn away, so they had to be very together. So
Right.
when I think from a whatever perspective you take, you, we should be building a vision as a we-ness. And what I often notice with a lot of couples, it's very much about I. It's no longer about we. And
Yes.
once there's a sense of we, but not just we with ourselves, but we with higher meaning, it's like
Mhm.
it becomes more than just like touching this or do like it's like it's when every time I make love to my wife, I'm saying to her, like, you're the reason, you're the person that I'm bringing the world to, or I'm building the world for. Like you're my partner in making the world a better place. And we will do this together.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's powerful. And so I often try to also ask couples, like, what's your philosophy? What's your foundation? As Gottman said in the very beginning, it's like you guys should be building some sense of purpose. And if you don't have that, there's no attic. And if there's no attic, that rain's coming in and all that snow and everything else. And like it's just you're this full with water and snow and crap, and you have no attic. No wonder you're not turned on. You're like,
I was gonna say.
yeah. Well, it's like your body's constantly in crisis mode, but really it's not a crisis. It's a remedy. It's a remedial fix. It's a little bit of both. Like if I don't get my attic fixed soon, this is just going to be trying to, you know, clean off things that are just, soap off a, an ocean. It's like there's always going to be water that's there. Anyway, just getting all philosophical here because I do think there's a sense of like sex is very deep. I see it as very deep spiritual. You might take a different view, which is fine, but that's I don't know if you wanted to play that. Like there's something really intimate there. Um,
I I love what you said about
it's kind of like, wow, that's powerful. Like when you study the meaning of sex. And I do wonder,
Mhm.
maybe like, gosh, it is kind of interesting. We're starting to find all these couples that are no longer having sex. And yet, just throw this out there, we've also been told the past 30 years that we should be thinking very selfishly of sex. And maybe that's actually the reason where we're no longer horny. And maybe it's actually we're supposed to go beyond that. Sex isn't selfish. It's not just about what feels good. It's actually there's something a deeper purpose, and there's the spontaneity at the same time
Yeah.
as one. Like I do wonder that sometimes. Like, did they have these conversations 300 years ago? Maybe they did. Actually, they did because Paul writes about it in the Book of Corinth. So never mind. So yes, they have been having this kind of. Just answer my own question. Never mind. So
I love that though, what you're describing. And I think tying it back to something you said earlier about and call me out on this because I don't want to make this meaning for you, but just
mm,
I guess the connection I'm making is when you talked about it earlier, like this the urgency around it and that this is kind of the problem, right? Like versus looking at it more symptomatically is
mm,
that um I think the issue being the unity within a couple, the shared vision within a couple, the shared vision, the weeness, all of those things you were mentioning. It is such a deeper definition, way of experiencing and looking at this, right? It's not, yes, there is fun to it. Yes, there's connection, but there's realm of connection and when we're talking about being one, and the safety and security and just having a shared sense of purpose and being,
yeah.
uh, that I think is when I when people do operate in ways where we've just completely lost sight of each other, like, are we even seeing each other anymore?
Mm,
That's where I think that next step is we don't have that shared sense of we don't have an understanding or concept anymore, even a framework
mm.
of what a we is. So how to connect in that way when it's like a big I can see where that could feel like a big jump because maybe
Yeah.
that's the part that needs more of a discussion
And
of
maybe that's kind of like the ideal that you want to get like, yeah,
Mhm.
your clients to. It's so fun doing this podcast because sometimes I feel like I'm talking about just us being as a clinician. Other times I want to bring in my own personal life. Other times I'm bringing in my struggles as a both a dad and a husband. So it's like it's eclectic in those things. But
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe that's just kind of the ideal that we get our clients to eventually, or at least have them tap into, or at least yeah, something like that where we can challenge them to think a little bit more broadly. I do have to go. It is
Oh
3:07.
my goodness.
I do have Endicott. I got to teach at 3:30.
And I have school pickup.
And you guys look all right. All right. Well, it's good to see you. Thanks for listening to Drinks with Strengths, everybody. We had fun with this. I'm so glad we did this. So good to see
I'm
you.
so happy too. This was an
Yeah.
awesome one. And I think other discussions stemming from this one, I would love to maybe if everyone's open to it, I would love to continue this, maybe do another podcast for like a part two.
Yeah. And please leave a review and like. We got to get those numbers up. All right. I'll see
I
y'all.
love that
Thanks.
goal.
All right. Bye.
Bye.